And the results from Alessandro Iurilli et al. 2024 are further echoed in a recent meta-analysis published in December 2025, titled, quote, Finasteride use does not lead to depression or suicide, insights from a large-scale cohort study and Mendelian randomization analysis, unquote, by Jing Wang et al. So the researchers first ran a Mendelian randomization analysis using single nucleotide polymorphisms, also known as SNPs for short. These are typically tiny common one-letter differences in DNA. Basically, DNA is written in a four-letter chemical alphabet, being A, C, G, T. These are nucleotide bases, A for adenine, C for cytosine, G for guanine, and T for thymine. And at any given spot in the genome, most people might have, say, one letter like A, adenine, while some people might have a different letter, say G for guanine. And because of that, that single letter swap can slightly change how strongly certain genes are expressed or how certain traits cluster in a population. So here in this study, they used SNPs, those single nucleotide polymorphisms, and they pretty much found a data set of many people's genomes from the United Kingdom that was associated with finasteride prescription use. And that was a proxy instrument for finasteride exposure. Then they tested whether those SNPs predicted exposure that was linked to depression or suicidality across multiple genetic datasets. Any weak signals disappeared after correcting for multiple comparisons. Then they did a separate real-world follow-up analysis in UK Biobank using a Cox regression survival model, essentially excluding people with prior depression and suicidal history and adjusting for demographics and lifestyle factors. And once again, they found no statistically meaningful difference in depression or suicide outcomes between finasteride users and non-users, with nearly identical depression rates. And this is exactly why the OCD connection matters, because disorders in this obsessive-compulsive spectrum carry real suicide risks, including the classic OCD itself, or maybe even a hair loss-induced OCD, if you will. Another bit of evidence, a Swedish population-based study titled, quote, Suicide in Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder, a population-based study of 36,788 Swedish patients, unquote, by Fernandez de la Cruz et al. 2017. And as the title entails, people with OCD, again, we already know this, as we stated before, are at a substantial risk of suicide. And we can go even deeper, right? I know I'm being very verbose in naming these studies, but this is a pretty serious issue, so we have to present the evidence for people who are trying to be snotty and conservative about what gets to be on insurance and what doesn't get to be on insurance, because I think you can argue for hair loss disorders being on insurance. We have a systematic review and meta-analysis specifically on OCD reports, wide variability, but consistently non-trivial prevalence of suicide attempts and suicidal ideation. And when hair loss is the trigger that tips a vulnerable person into BDD-style obsessions and compulsions, it can absolutely be the catalyst for a mental illness that carries a genuine risk of self-harm. And for those of you listening, you can find that study titled, quote, Suicide Attempts and Suicidal Ideation in Patients with Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis, unquote, by Pellegrini et al. 2020.